listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and have your work build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.
Hello, and welcome to the Author Inside You podcast. I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Today, our guest is Bryan P. Cleary, author, poet, and U.S. patent holder. He's best known for his children's books that use humor to help with grammar. Welcome, Bryan. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Bryan, I see that you sold over 3 million books. How did you accomplish that?
Well, I have 8 brothers and sisters, and they bought several thousand books each over the course. No, that's not actually true. One of the things when I'm visiting schools, and I've been in 42 different states across the country, and I've done a little bit of in Europe as well. When I'm talking to children who really can't get their head around what 3 million is of something, I will say to them, if you went to the local NFL stadium here, if you're in Cleveland, you say, we're going to go to the Brown Stadium. If you look at all those chairs, there's 72,000 seats or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Picture that there's 42 of my books on every one of those chairs, and That's how you get to 3 million.
That's a lot of books.
Yes. So, but I did this over a long period of time. I mean, remember when somebody talks about selling 1 million books, in 6 months, or J.K. Rowling's ridiculous run of, selling, 195 million books over the course of a career, or whatever. That's all in a very short time, and those are freakish occurrences. Mm-hmm. And some of what has to be counted is that. There's hardcover sales, there's softcover sales, but there's also things like, that I get picked up by the Book of the Month Club or Scholastic or things like that, and they'll print, 30,000 copies of something and discount it and sell it only to teachers or sell it through catalogs or, that sort of thing. So there's just different ways to get to that number, but it's still. I mean, I'm really proud of that number. It's just that, it didn't happen overnight.
Right. That's just an impressive number.
Yeah.
3 million.
So let's talk about your book. What exactly are your books, and how did you come up with this idea?
Well, I have a whole bunch of books, and if you go to Amazon and just type in Bryan P. Cleary or something like that, you will find that I have a whole page there. I think there's 53 titles in all. My first book was called Jamaica Sandwich, which was all geographical puns. And I sent it around to about a dozen different publishers. There was a book in almost every library in the country, and I don't know if it still is there or not, but Children's Writers and Illustrators Market, okay? It's part of the Writers Market brand of books. Okay. And it would tell you, this was in 1993 or 4 or something like that. It tells you, in those days, what the fax number was. There was no email addresses yet, and what the who the editor was for each of these publishing houses. Were they or were they not taking unsolicited manuscripts? Were they reading things that did not come from an agent? That kind of thing. So that was sort of the Bible for getting published. And I know it was still around as of a handful of years ago. I haven't used it now in many years because I've developed relationships with a couple different publishers. But I sent my first book around, and the first dozen or so said no, and I sent 10, 12 at a time. And now, the only thing I would say that I disagree with in Writers Market or in Children's Writers and Illustrators Market is that they'll often caution you to not give simultaneous submissions. And you know what that is, right?
Yes.
Simultaneous submissions? Mm-hmm. Okay. So they want to basically say that if we want this, we don't want to know that 8 other people are looking at it right now, that kind of thing, right? Well, that's fine for them, but what does it do for you?
Yeah.
Nothing,
Right.
Yeah.
So I sent it to a dozen places at once, and then in the next round of a dozen, very early in that, I got a phone call. And today it would probably be an email, but in 1993 or whatever it was, I got a phone call, and they were saying basically that they really liked it. They liked my manuscript, but that they only did series. So it was kind of the pessimist could have said, "Oh, well, they only do series," but I was looking at it and thinking, "You want more of these?"
Yeah.
So that's great. So we came up with other pun titles, and I did a series of 4 books that were hardcover, very high priced. Lerner Publishing Group is a terrific outfit. They're a wonderful publisher. They're big into libraries and schools. And I'd say the only downside at the time was that because they make such a nice high-end product that the price is fairly expensive, and there was no paperback for the original runs. So if you wanted to buy this, you were paying like $17 or $18 in
Okay.
1993 money, and there was no, well, I'll wait for the paperback, because it was really catering to libraries and school libraries and teachers, and they want to have their books be fairly indestructible. So
Yes, yeah.
they don't really, they weren't offering it as a paperback at that time.
Sure, paperback's not going to last very long with grade school
No.
kids, right?
No, and especially not in a library. Yeah.
Right. How long did it take to write those first 4 books? So you had one done, but then you needed to go back and write 3 more?
Yes, and remember, they're children's books, and they're also not like Harry Potter or anything like that. They're picture books, in essence. They're 32 pages, 16 spreads, 13 stanzas, if that means anything to you in terms of rhyming. It's like 13 paragraphs of rhyme, right? So really, they're very short. So, I mean, I was able to pull together 3 more titles in, probably a couple weeks or something like that. And then, we took a while to edit that, and they shopped for a illustrator, and that took a while, and it took them forever. It was like 3 years before it came out, and now I work on a tighter schedule than that, but that's how it was then. So these didn't see the light of day till something like 1995 or 6.
Wow.
3 years.
I have to say that I love the cover of your books. The illustrations look very nice, and the colors also.
Yeah, I've had a lot of luck with illustrators. I've had illustrators from many different countries, Russia and England a couple of times. We had somebody from Montreal, somebody from Toronto, half a dozen probably from America. We have somebody from the Netherlands, Ireland.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot of illustrators, and it takes a lot longer to draw than it does to write, typically. So I mean, I need to have a bunch of people drawing to kind of keep up with. I mean, it's just they're more picture intensive. That's why they're called picture books.
Sure.
Well,
so it's not the same illustrator each time.
Right. In fact, Bryan Gable did probably, I don't know, 18, 20, 22 titles for me. And we never met. We never spoke on the phone. We never emailed each other.
Wow.
We've never contacted each other. I sent him a card when he had a relative pass away. Then he was taking some time off work for, and I mailed it. I think I even mailed it to the Toronto Globe and Mail, where he was the editorial cartoonist.
Oh.
And we have had no back and forth whatsoever.
So, since you went through a publishing company, did you have any say in who was an illustrator?
Before the internet was widely available, you would be looking at things like slides to, like this is a person's last book, or this is some of the work that they did, and so I had some input on it. But remember that the publisher. If in fact, I had suggested someone, and they said, yeah, let's go with them. And the person I suggested couldn't do 4 books in that short amount of time, and so they ended up choosing somebody. But they wanted me to be happy with it.
Okay.
But ultimately, if I was going to suggest somebody that was going to charge $6,000 a book, and I'm brand new at this, and they have somebody that they use all the time for $3,500, while they want me to be happy, it is a business decision sometimes. And are you really going to sell that many more units because I got the author or the illustrator that I wanted to have? Probably not. But as I got to be more important to them in terms of my book sales, I had more voice in it, but ultimately it's a business decision every single time.
Sure.
And so they want me to be happy with the illustrator and the illustrations. And generally speaking, I mean, I've been plugged in and had a seat at that table all along, but it's never been my final call.
Okay.
It's never been up to me.
Right. So, Brian,
Which makes sense.
Can we go back a little bit? In the beginning, you mentioned visiting schools and talking to children. How did you get to go to 500 schools in all those states?
Well, my books ended up being fairly curriculum-based fairly early on. And so most of my books basically will explain a concept, like what a verb is, or what it might explain punctuation. It might help teach poetry. And if you're a poetry teacher in fifth grade, or an English teacher, language arts teacher, you might be able to stay one page ahead of your students, and I've got a whole book that instructs you on that.
Wow.
And walks you through that. I've done science-y books and math-y books and English-y books and pun ones and poetry ones and things like that. So naturally, they're pretty curriculum-based. And what started happening pretty early, I was sort of early in the pool at having a website. And so when there were probably only 50 authors in the country that had their own website, I was probably fairly early on. My local library put something up for me, and eventually my publisher did. And I usually get invited by a teacher or a librarian, and it's another revenue stream for me that I'm able to do 15 or 20 school visits a year. So it adds on to what you make in royalties and that sort of thing.
Sure.
Well, that sounds wonderful to me, to be able to go to different schools and see, what they're like, and then to
see the reaction from your audience right there.
Plus, I've been to Amish schools, I've been to Jewish schools, Catholic schools. I've been to schools that were surrounded on three sides by farmland.
Wow.
I've been in inner city schools. Just this past month, I went to 2 one-room schoolhouses where the entire school is in one room.
Wow.
Kindergarten through 8th grade are fewer than 25 kids in both of their cases, and it's like a throwback to another time.
Where are those schools?
Yeah. Those were in Michigan.
Michigan.
Yeah, it's called Bad Axe, Michigan.
Huh. Well,
Yeah.
Very interesting. So, do you pay your own way to get to those schools? Or is it
the contract calls for me to receive an honorarium plus, for instance, if I'm in Cleveland, if somebody in North Olmsted wanted me to come, I would just drive myself there. There's no hotel, there's no airfare. They usually the tradition or convention would be that they would treat me for lunch, if they have a potluck or they order in or something like that. I think I've probably paid for my own meal once or twice in 500 school visits, but it's just really not that way typically. I mean, part of it is that they understand that I didn't pack a lunch if I'm in Wichita, Kansas. I didn't, I woke up in a hotel that day. I took a rental car to get to them. So I require to have all of those fees paid. For instance, airfare, cab back and forth if I need it, rental car if I need it, meals, hotel, everything like that.
Do school districts work together? Like, would there be 2 school districts that would have you go to 2 different schools, or is it just one school and you fly in and fly out?
I've had it both ways. When I've been on, for instance, now that I am 20 years older than when I started, I'm not going to fly to Los Angeles and do one school visit and turn around and fly back. If they want me for 2 days at their school, then we can pay for 2 days, and that's great. More than likely, though, like when I started doing West Coast ones, and I've probably been in 20 or 25 California schools over the years, you'd get 5 or 6 all at once. Usually they schedule somebody to come for Monday through Friday, or I've even stayed over the weekend and stuck around for the Monday or Tuesday. Yeah. But it was great.
Yeah, it sounds it sounds wonderful.
And that's all
Yeah.
lined up through your publisher, or is that
No,
that's
no,
you independently?
they contact me directly through. There's a couple sites you can advertise on. I think one's called Illustrators and Author Source, or Author and Illustrator Source. It's like $100 a year to list yourself on that. One is called illustratorauthor.com. And for $60 or $70 a year, you can list yourself on there and put your contact information, put a picture of yourself, maybe some of your books, a little blurb. And so the idea there is that you have a little, couple dozen people. In some cases, there's more than that. But I haven't done a lot more than that so far. And I may need to at some point start doing a little bit more of that. But a lot of it is just drawn through the website. I have a great website up. If you were to go to, from a desktop, bryanpcleary.com would get you right on there. And I worked very closely with my publisher to have a website that if somebody has no intention of ever buying anything from me, they can still have a good experience on the website. There's a poem of the week, a word of the week.
Oh.
There's all the information about my books. There's they can click on something and hear if I was interviewed by a radio station, or if I was the Plain Dealer wrote an article or something like that. It's just like there's a package of stuff there about me. And one of the things is they can click on it and send me an email and say, hey, I'm a teacher in this school district, and we want to know what your budget, what you charge to come and put on a day, a school day for us. I do in-services. I don't know if you know what those are, but it's like where you teach the teachers how to do something.
Sure.
And I also put on workshops and presentations.
Wow, it sounds like more than a full-time job, just
Yeah.
keeping up with the web page and your appointments and
Yeah, and
writing the
I'm
next
really fortunate that the web page is handled largely by the. I basically had to sort of kind of bless everything on there, and a lot of it's stuff from my books anyway, things that I already wrote. But they were great about, they have a great understanding of teachers at Learner. Learners, like their whole basis is curriculum based, and so as a result of that, their knowledge of how teachers teach and what tools they need they were able to provide me with a lot of things that I would have been more of a tourist in, and they were more of a citizen of that country,
Right. Leah and I will put links to those web pages that you mentioned and to Learner Publishing on the show notes at theauthorinside.you.com.
Well, what I like about your website, it sounds like you are still teaching people, even if they don't purchase your books. I think that's pretty neat.
Right. What you really have to do is make something where it's a pool that they would splash around in, whether or not they were a consumer of yours or not. And if you can give teachers a bigger bag of tricks, eventually it's kind of like the thing about if you hang around the barber shop enough, you're eventually going to get a haircut.
Right.
Now, there are millions of people who have been to my website who have never bought a book, and that's totally fine, because that's maybe not what they always need. Maybe they need something else. And if I can help stimulate some workshop of theirs, suggest some activities. A lot of the activities that I do when I go to schools, I sort of pilfered from teachers around the country in different ways. And I thought, if I could just do this, and I see the teachers going, oh, well, this is the way we do it. And I was hesitant in the beginning to do in-services because, I say I'm a tourist in their world. They're a citizen of that land of teaching. I'm there 20 days a year. They're there 180 days a year,
But what's nice
I've also been in 500 schools, and they maybe have been in 3. So there are some things that I've seen, and I can share as a result of that.
So, Bryan, are you using any social media to promote your books?
To promote individual books a little bit here and there, I'm moderate. I was at one time very active on Facebook. I have about 6,000 followers, and it never turned into one speaking gig. I don't think during that time it didn't turn into, and it was a lot to do. Now that doesn't mean that it can't be great for other people. If I read that I just got a great review. And reviews are a big key for how I've sold the books that I've sold. I mean, a school library journal writes about you, Kirkus Reviews writes about you, get a starred review somewhere. I will retweet those, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And I will also, I mean, for the longest time, I did sort of a word nerd thing on Facebook where it would just be a daily thing about some oddity about language or vocabulary or humor or whatever. And I have hundreds of these little things they put out. And like I said, there's a lot of competition there for people's attention. Like a cat playing the piano or something like that. So there's always something that it's hard to get noticed, I guess, if you're not sort of full time in that.
It is, yes.
Learner, I think because of their size, they have I think maybe a couple hundred employees, and they at one time did a couple hundred titles a year. The bigger houses have are much bigger outfits, and I've found that the size of them was just perfect for me. It ends up, too, I lived in Minneapolis, a suburb of Minneapolis for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, and my first editor at Learner, which is located in Minneapolis.
Oh, okay.
Which is by itself unusual. I mean, most you think of publishing, you think of New York, right?
Sure,
Maybe
absolutely.
Chicago,
right?
Maybe Philly, but they have their own printing presses there. They have their own setup. They have, the person running it is probably only about 50 years old. It's a family-oriented place in that this is second generation, but it's small enough that kind of everybody there has heard of me. When I come in the building every handful of years or something like that, most of the people there they've done some kind of work on one of my books, whether it was printing it, editing it, working with design or whatever.
Well, that's really neat that you can go and you can visit the people who've actually worked on your book instead of everything being done in a country that you're not even sure where it is on the map.
Sure. Right.
So how's the best way for our listeners to purchase your books?
Well, Amazon is probably the easiest because if you think about it, if you I went into one of the world's biggest bookstores, physical bookstores, that Powell's it's in Oregon, right?
Okay.
And they had like 13 of my books, which is fantastic.
Okay.
If you go into a regular bookstore in Cleveland, I'd be lucky to have one or two. If I go into a library, you'll often find a half a dozen, maybe even a dozen. But there, think about it. One of the biggest physical bookstores in the whole world only had a quarter of my books, right? So Amazon.
I'm sure there's a lot of people listening say that would be great.
Yeah.
Right. I know what you're saying. But if Amazon's probably the easiest because you can sort by author and then just there it is. It's all right there.
So how's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
Well, BryanPCleary.com is my website, and if they're just looking for the kind of work I do and things like that, www.BryanPCleary.com, Bryan with an I, not a Y, and Cleary is Cleary, middle initial P as in Patrick. That's how I get most people coming to me. Some people who might want to have me come to their school or something like that, or they need a keynote speaker for something. I have a fairly easy to remember email address. It's baberuth60@aol.com. And it's Babe Ruth because he was the first person I ever wrote about. When I was in 3rd grade, they asked us to write about somebody famous, and I picked Babe Ruth, and 60 because he hit 60 home runs. So baberuth60@aol.com is my email address.
That's a fun fact.
Yes.
What would be your best advice to new authors?
Marry well. No. I would say that if you've done the hard part of writing a book, you should do the next part of sending it around. Do you know what I mean? Like the person who says that they wrote one, but they don't want to show it to anybody or whatever. You may have already done the hard part, and no one is ever going to call you and ask you what is in your desk drawer. Mm-hmm. Nobody is ever going to say, you're not going to get a call from Penguin Publishing or Putnam or HarperCollins or Random House, and they're going to say, hey, we're just cold calling today and wondered if you had any manuscripts. And so it's just never going to, you owe yourself to go through the process of that. And when I say go through the process, I don't even mean that it's ever going to be published. I think you should go through that, though, because there's no hope for getting it without putting it out there, is I guess what I would say. I know almost nothing about self-publishing, and I do know I know a couple people who have had a little bit of luck with that, but I guess if 60 different companies who make their living trying to sell something told me that my thing wasn't right, maybe all 60 of them are wrong, maybe. But it's not that likely that all of them are. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so what that can mean is, can it be that you had a great idea, but you wrote it in rhyme, and that's really not the way to go? Could it be that you submitted photographs with it, and they couldn't picture their own illustrations with it, or something like that? So a lot of times, and I guess this is more just, and it's not, I don't say this to spare someone's feelings necessarily, but when someone passes on a manuscript and we get that dagger in our heart, right? We get that terrible feeling, right? That we are being rejected. I mean, we are saying, I want to be part of you, and they're saying, we don't want to be part of you, but really, instead of hearing no, you might be hearing, not this year, not yet. You might be hearing, we already have something that does that job or fulfills that need. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we heard it has a lot to do with timing and.
Yeah, or just that, we you don't know this, but we already have an adorable story about a little double house where the little doggy goes up and down, and he has different names in each floor or something. I mean, that's a cute little thing, but maybe they already have that. And if they already have it, it's a good idea. So, the idea that they had something similar to it doesn't mean you're a failure. It means somebody else did it on Monday and you did it on Thursday. I mean, okay, you can live with that, right?
Right. So you said don't be afraid to send in your manuscript because no one's going to call you. What if you've written a children's book that's heavily based on illustrations like your books? How do you send that in?
Well, I was really lucky in that I worked in one of the largest creative divisions in the world, and I could say, I could ask somebody basically as a favor, can you, spot me a couple of illustrations here, and if they like your stuff and my stuff, then you can ride along with this, or I could just pay you, for a couple $100 for the illustrations. And it ended up being that, like I said, I mentioned before, that particular illustrator wasn't able to hit the deadlines that they were talking about in the time that they wanted to, and we ended up, just in a friendly way going a different direction.
Okay.
But if you don't illustrate well, you shouldn't be illustrating it yourself. And if it can help to show reference or something about, the kind of illustrations you have in mind are like this for either scale or color or technique, that might help. If it's so heavily, what I would just advise against is going into any real debt over that, because they may have a contract with an illustrator that's, hey, we have to use so-and-so 3 times a year anyway, and we love her stuff, and so we're going to end up using her anyway.
Great
Do you know
advice.
what I mean?
Yes, good advice.
I understand exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Going into debt is not. It's not going to. There's a good chance that it might not be worth it. That's what you're saying.
Right, and what little as I said, I know about self-publishing, I just would be cautious if a whole lot of people have said, a whole lot of people who make their living at this have passed on it. Again, can they be wrong? Absolutely. Could a dozen people be wrong? Sure. 60 or 70 probably won't be. But, there's the case. I was making a speech one time, and I asked for a show of hands I was talking to a bunch of publishers. Who here passed on Harry Potter? Some hands went up, and they passed on it for good reasons. The author wanted more upfront than what is typical in a first, for a first book. It was 600 or 700 pages long. Yeah. It had no technology in it whatsoever. It was supposed to be aimed at boys and girls equally. It takes place in an English boarding school in I don't know what year. And so, there was a lot of things going on there. That was not a slam dunk. It was not one of those things where you'd go, oh, well, yeah, this is going to be great. This is going to be great. And I read it. It's fantastic. Yeah. And she, there's something called the Children's Choice Awards, the top books of the year, chosen by 10,000 school children nationwide in 1996. Shel Silverstein and I were on the same list, right next to each other.
Wow,
yes.
That's cool.
And that same year, Harry Potter was not yet on that list. And so there was a year where J.K. Rowling was looking at this list and seeing Bryan Cleary and was still trying to find somebody to publish her book. And God bless her, because it was off to the races once she started selling. And I don't know if you've ever read the books, but they're terrific.
Yes. Yeah.
And, that is, and you are crazy to try to compare your own book sales to that, because that happens not even once in a generation. Right. It's a freakish thing that happened, and it's wonderful that it did, and it's well deserved.
Right. All right. Well, Bryan, I think we've eaten up enough of your time today, so I really appreciate you coming on The Author Inside You with us today. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sure.
We appreciate you taking the time.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Author Inside You podcast, and until next time,
right on.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.